This is a very brief introduction to the Aristophanes play, The Frogs. It just gives us an idea of how old comedy worked. The Frogs, of course, has recently been remade into a musical by Stephen Sondheim, and well worth your time to hunt it down, listen to the music, follow the plot, because it follows the original story quite closely and can be very illuminating as well. In the prologue of the play The Frogs, the demigod, that is half-god Dionysus, and his slave Xanthias argue in a very meta-theatrical way, that is, knowing that they're in a theater and talking about themselves in a theater, over what sort of complaints would make the funniest opening to the play. The inciting incident is that Dionysus is in despair about the low estate to which tragedy has fallen at the festival in his honor, and that Athens is now in great need, because it's at war, of some comic relief. So he resolves to travel to Hades to retrieve the recently deceased Euripides to create better tragedies. And off they go on their journey. On their way, they stop to consult with Hercules, who has been to Hades and back successfully to get his dog Cerberus. So that's Hercules there, dressed in a lion skin and carrying a club, his traditional uniform. But Dionysus adopts this uniform in order to go on his journey, hoping to fool them into the fact that he is his half-brother Hercules. Though the difference between the hyper-masculine Hercules and the very effeminate Dionysus is the joke. Hercules wisecracks that his brother looks very effeminate, and when asked about how to get to Hades, he advises hanging oneself, drinking poison, or jumping off a tower. But Dionysus, who's planning on coming back, opts for the long route. That is, he takes a boat to get there. The boat is pulled by Charon, the oarsman to the land of the dead. Traditionally, Charon carried the worthies across Lake Acheron, which separated the living from the dead. And he agrees, because Dionysus is a demigod, that he will take him for a bribe, but not Xanthias. Xanthias says that's fine, he'll just walk around and wait for Dionysus on the other side. A joke about how long he thinks it's going to take for Dionysus to get there. And then, as you see in this illustrated cartoon of the frogs, they start to hear the sound of this famous chorus, the chorus members in this case playing frogs. Brekekekek coax coax is what the chorus says, and in fact it's the only words of their entire chorus. It goes on for ages. Brekekekek coax coax. Here's a wonderful T-shirt written in Greek with the words of this. Talk about esoteric. But the frogs turn out not to be benevolent. The frogs on the lake are protecting the land of the dead and trying to overturn the boat and keep Dionysus from getting there. In fact, they are opposed to anyone making the crossover, any living person making the crossover to the land of the dead. Brekekekek coax coax. The frogs attack and impede the progress of the boat, and their entire chorus is their croaking sounds. Dionysus does eventually make it through, however, and when he arrives in Hades, there's a chorus of mystics, initiates into the Dionysian mysteries, who sing a hymn of praise to Dionysus. And once he gets here, Dionysus encounters Aeschylus, Aeschylus, the god of Hades, often in contemporary productions he's called Pluto, is still angry with Hercules for stealing Serapis and seeing Dionysus in the fake costume. He thinks that Dionysus is Hercules, and so he's angry with him. He threatens to send monsters in revenge, and because Dionysus is this effeminate coward, he quickly talks Xanthias into changing clothes with him. But then a maid arrives suddenly, who remembers Hercules fondly because they had a little thing, and seeing Xanthias in the clothes, wants to go and have the little thing again with Xanthias, so she whisks him off to see a course of dancing virgins, and he's only too happy to go along. This is the Broadway version of the dancing virgins. But of course Dionysus is now jealous because of the beautiful maid, so he wants his clothes back, and no sooner does he get them back than he meets more people who are angry with Hercules, and so then he makes Xanthias trade the costumes yet again. At that point, tired of being taken advantage of, Xanthias suggests to Aeschylus that Dionysus be tortured to discover if he's a thief, and he very helpfully suggests several possible tortures. Dionysus, big coward that he is, instantly confesses the truth, but that he is a god, and both he and Xanthias are tortured anyway to determine if that is true. And it is. So a kindly maid drops by to give Xanthias a whole set of exposition about what's been going on in Hades since Euripides died. At that point, there's a contest in Hades. The newly deceased Euripides, who actually died only months before this play premiered, is challenged by the long-dead Aeschylus, who's been dead for about 50 years at that point, for a seat of honor as the best tragedian at Pluto's table, and Dionysus is supposed to judge. And in a very silly way, a scale is brought in, and they each weigh their verses, who has the heaviest and densest. This is a joke that plenty of theater history students get after they've tried to read through some Aeschylus and Euripides, where we often think they're pretty dense. And Aeschylus is judged the winner in Hades, having the heaviest and densest verse, and will therefore be at the seat of honor in Hades. But Euripides is judged to have more realistic verses and more tragic verses, but Aeschylus's verses are said to be more ennobling. And that settles the case there, but Dionysus still has to decide which of the two he will revive and take back to Athens, which is a different question than who will be the most honored person in Hades. Dionysus wants to know which of them will have the best advice on how to save this city, because Athens was then fighting a war. And he asks both for verses on the subject, and Euripides makes beautiful, beautiful verses, but the beauty of the words doesn't hide the fact that they really have almost no meaning. Aeschylus, you'll remember, was a war hero, a marathon warrior, and also fought at the Battle of Salamis, and his verses are rough, not in perfect meter or in perfect form, but are strictly practical advice. So Aeschylus is chosen, and Pluto agrees to release him to return to save Athens. That's supposed to be a happy ending, because then, if with him gone, Euripides can have the seat of honor of tragedy in hell. But in a late edition, Aeschylus turns his seat over to Sophocles instead. Sophocles actually died after the play premiered for the first time, which accounts for why he was not a candidate in the contests. But it's also why we think the original ending was different. We think the original ending was just that Euripides finally got to sit in the seat of honor in hell, but once Sophocles has died, then it's yet again yet another put down to him that he doesn't even get to win in the absence of Aeschylus. So what can we say about this play? We know that it was first staged at the Linnea in January 405 BCE, and that it was so successful that it was immediately revived at the city Dionysia in the following March, and that never happened with any other play in ancient times of which we know. It was just so popular that it was still current and was immediately revived. A year later, however, Athens fell to the Spartan general Lysander. Many people suggest because Athens had overextended its empire, and it was sort of the end of Athens and of the classical period as we know it. The theme of this play, Kenneth Dover tells us, simply old ways good, new ways bad, that things were better in the past. That Aristophanes can mock Dionysus, make him a character in the play, and also Hercules, and mock them both, suggests that religion by this point didn't have a particularly strong hold, or that Dionysus could be a figure of fun. And we also might note that the slave Xanthias, a prototype for the clever slave, is much smarter, braver, and more decisive than any of the gods depicted.